reflecting on America's 250th birthday, the cost of the holiday barbecue, which are the most independent states, and more Second Amendment news. Welcome to The States, powered by the Center Square. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. It's Thursday, July 2nd, 2026, and happy Independence Day. America 250, a celebration of the founding of this country, with the Declaration of Independence being signed July 4th, 1776. And while Americans plan parties with cookouts and fireworks, many will be reflecting on the significance of that document signed 2.5 centuries ago, which essentially was seen as the founders signing their own death warrant. They were, after all, declaring their independence from a powerful monarchy half a globe away. Now, joining us to discuss the founding of this country and where we stand 250 years later is Richard Samuelson, a professor at Hillsdale College. Professor, thanks for taking time with us here on this Independence Day weekend eve. Happy Independence Day. Talk a bit about the history of independence in this country. Was it all about tea taxes?
Well, thank you for having me. Happy Independence Day weekend. No, it was about the right to self-government, right? That is, the colonists were asserting their right to make taxes, to make their own laws, and Parliament was asserting its right to make law for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. The key issue was the question of taxes that persisted from the early 1760s until 1776, but several other issues were in play, such as the right to a trial before your peers in a local court. After the Tea Party, the British were so angry they tried to impose military government in Massachusetts. That's what rallied the other 12 colonies to union, actually, in the First Continental Congress. If they could do that to Massachusetts, they could do that to everybody. So it was the attack on individual liberties, symbolized by taxation, and the attack on our right to self-government through our right to make our own laws via our own legislatures.
You know, we always hear about the Boston Tea Party kind of being that linchpin that set everything off. But, you know, as you lay out, there were some pretty crucial things that the founders were focused on, right? I mean, the right to a speedy trial, the rights of having different types of protections in their personal effects and papers and such, still things that are being debated in courts across the country to this day. But what all went into getting that document where they got it to? How much work went into that final draft?
Well, it took a lot of work. I mean, Jefferson's a brilliant writer, of course, and so it helped to have him draft it. But, his draft was considerably longer and was somewhat different. His initial draft, the truths were sacred and undeniable rather than self-evident. It's not clear if Jefferson changed it or if probably Franklin changed it. We're not sure. The original draft, interestingly, had sacred there at the end, our sacred honor, which remains, and the middle, the denunciation of the slave trade, as scholars noted. They violates the sacred rights of humanity. That was the key to Jefferson's original draft. In order to help the Union, we didn't explicitly condemn slavery and pull it out, and the truths at the front were also changed to self-evident, meaning they reflect something recognizable to the intellect, something human beings have in common. We can think, we can speak. Unlike other animals which do not have the ability to speak incoherent logical sentences, something which we humans struggle with too, of course. And it's also they toned down Jefferson's rhetoric. Jefferson is very personal. He speaks of the last stab of agonizing affections, which separates us. And that was toned down. It's a very forceful document. It's a rare case where the consensus is the committee made the work better.
Talk about some of the philosophies they tapped into, because I mean, it's not like they just pulled this out of them thinking about things. They had access to a wealth of historical philosophies.
Yeah. The document clearly cites John Locke. Locke spoke of life, liberty, and property, and happiness he speaks of not in the Treatise on Government, but in other works. But more explicitly in The Right to Revolution, the words are paraphrased from Locke. That is, when the government becomes oppressive, you have the right to revolt. So there's certainly Locke's Enlightenment thinking. The other thing that's very present, and one other thing that's very present, is common law. The middle of the document is an indictment of the king at common law. He hath violated the laws of England in many ways. And that produced the problem, because when you protest the king to secure the rights of Englishmen, so much so that in order to secure them, you can't be English anymore. The rights of Englishmen become simply the rights of men. And then you're in a rather different discussion than you were before independence. So independence is a hinge moment in that switch from the rights of Englishmen, the rights of Britons perhaps, to the rights of men. And the philosophy comes out of the Enlightenment, but it's also very interesting that the American Revolution, unlike the French Revolution, the philosophers and the religious ministers were on the same team. Whereas in the French Revolution, the church was on one side and the philosophers were by and large on the other.
So sounds like they put a lot of work into this foundation to build those principles, but what do they look like today? Are the foundational principles withstanding the pressure, or are they starting to wear down a bit?
Well, they're still present in our regime, right? We still talk about liberty. We believe in individual liberty. But of course, liberty and responsibility were two sides of the same coin. In his farewell address, Washington speaks of the duties of men and citizens rather than just the rights of men and citizens. Right, the Spider-Man principle: with great power comes great responsibility. If you have all these liberties, you better use them reasonably well, because if you don't, they will be taken away from you. And it seems that we've perhaps become a little uncomfortable with the duties that liberty imposes upon us. That is, we must choose to treat our neighbors well. We must choose to work for a living. We must choose to take care of ourselves and our families in many ways. Otherwise, it being necessary that people be taken care of, will be done by the collective, and then the cost will be to our individual liberty. The other element is,
well, if you could just touch up briefly here on the idea of the federalism and the states. How are states performing right now when it comes to being the laboratory of democracies that some indicate as how this constitutional republic set up, right?
Yeah, that's very important. As Madison was quite clear that if we consolidated, all power would actually leave the legislative process and the deliberative process and legislature in Washington. The Congress simply couldn't handle it, and it would have to be delegated to the executive branch, right? And part of that is being a compound republic. That is partly federal, partly national, and having power in the states to try various things. Will this work? Does it work? Where does it work? Various experiments, from everything has been tried over the years. We tried various socialist experiments, 19th century utopian communities, even a free love community tried. That actually lasted longer than the intellectuals utopian community, believe it or not. And we've also, of course, had many experiments in the 20th century, figuring out how to do healthcare better, how to get housing better. And allowing the cities and states to try different policies is important. It also means that we have the right to move. You can move from one place where you don't like the policies to another where the policies seem to be working better. The laboratories of democracy in the states are very important. They're fundamental to keeping we the people in charge of the government, rather than having a single unitary monopoly on how our lives, how the laws we live under shall be.
Now, is this experiment done? I mean, there's groups of people in various states across the country today that they're working to grow their movements to create new states out of the ones that already exist. I'm thinking Illinois, Oregon's had that in the past, California, other states across the country. Does that indicate that we're not quite done with this experiment?
I hope not. John Adams said, "Don't despair of the republic," right? What else? And new states is not a new phenomenon. It's an old phenomenon. That's a sign of health, that we're thinking, how would we want to change how we're governing ourselves? And America can renew itself, right? It has several times. The problem is, the old line is, it works better in practice than in theory. And this drives the intellectuals nuts. They said, hey, I didn't expect that to work out. It actually, we kind of we blundered through, but we made it work in the end.
And then finally here, of course, on Independence Day, holiday eve, how can this nation continue to be that beacon of individual liberty, freedom, and self-governance for the world?
Well, reading and pondering the Declaration, of course, is a good start. But remembering that it was always a challenge. It was a very near-run thing in the Revolution. Right? It wasn't clear that we were going to win, just as it wasn't clear that we would survive the Civil War. If you're truly free, it means that you might actually not win, right? If victory is guaranteed, you're not really free. And that means the challenge is on us. We free Americans who have the rights of life, liberty, and to pursue happiness, to ensure that this republic continues for another 250 years.
Well, we could probably talk for hours about the difference between a democracy and a constitutional republic, so we'll have to probably save that for another time. Richard Samuelson, professor at Hillsdale College, thank you so much for your insight, and happy Independence Day. We'll be right back with more from the States. Welcome back to the States. I'm Greg Bishop. Are you finishing your shopping for the holiday season? Well, are you thinking about how much more you're paying than last year? Let's check in now with Everyday Economics, where earlier this week, the Center Square publisher Chris Krug and PhD economist Orphe Devungi talked about the cost of the Independence Day holiday.
$250. The fourth costs a little bit more, but not really in real terms. It is a record $73.82 for a cookout. That's a cookout for 10 people. That's inflation adjusted, flat. And the backyard fireworks nearly doubled in the pandemic and never fell back. Dr. O, let's have some fun. And let's talk about what's going on in the economy. The American Farm Bureau Federation's summer cookout survey says that a cookout for 10 is about $74. It's up 4%. It's the highest since the survey began in 2016. 4% tracks pretty broad inflation. Prices are up actually 4.2% over the year ending in May. The cookout's still moving in line with the wider economy.
Yeah.
Let's start with the question that everybody has.
It's going to be cheaper with charcoal than propane.
Well, let me let you talk about that. So, I mean, $74 for a cookout, still a pretty good deal. What's it cost to throw a 4th of July cookout this year, really?
Yeah, I mean, so the date is fascinating because it just shows, look, it's the highest it's ever been at $73, $7.38 per person. You think about it, it's still, it's risen in line with the rest of the economy. I think you mentioned that already. I think it's reasonable. I think it's reasonable. If you do it yourself and and like you go to fast food restaurants nowadays and you can't get it for less than $7.38 per person. So I think that's reasonable. You compare it to what's happening to inflation in the past year, and it's actually right in line, maybe even slightly below, because the big spike in inflation has really been a story about energy prices, right? And so, which is why I joked around, charcoal over propane might actually work even better. But basically, the real meat of it is the grocery prices, right? Food prices have been on the rise, and I think that is where the price of the cookout has gone up, right? It's the beef, the ground beef, it's the potato salad, the eggs.
Let me give you the inside scoop on that basket that we're bringing to the 4th of July. It's going to be our Independence Day meal. So beef prices are up about 5.5%. I mean, I buy beef every week. I see it. The new norm where I am is that a pound of ground chuck's about $6.50 to $7 a pound. That's in line with what's going on nationally. Potato salad prices actually are down 18%. And, eggs are down. I mean, as we remember from just a couple of years ago, I mean, egg prices were completely off the chain. I mean, completely out of control.
2022, man.
Yeah.
Everything is below the 2022 peak, right? So
So, the other thing that's kind of interesting, that's sort of out there, with regard to the holiday itself, would be kind of like, what COVID did to the outdoor fireworks shows. We stopped getting together, that fireworks shows were completely canceled in some cases, right? We just didn't have big public events, in 2020 and 2021. Backyard fireworks have kind of skyrocketed, I guess you would say. That we now as a country are spending, like, I don't know what the dollars attached to it, but 436.4 million pounds of fireworks on an annual basis in 2022, and that number's been pretty close to flat, right? So what's happening over there?
Yeah, I ultimately, the consumer spending that is holding up is because old habits are hard, right? To what's the expression?
They're hard to break.
They're hard to break. They're hard to break. And so we go ahead and do it, right? We do it anyway. And sometimes we just have to put it on the credit card instead of, because things are kind of tight. And that's what's happening with the consumer altogether right now. They're going to go ahead and celebrate anyway. They're going to go ahead and enjoy their summer breaks anyway. And you see it in the data, right? Real incomes are basically flat, but consumer spending in real terms is still rising.
Is it a case of what we're just not willing to give up? And how do you read that as an economist? How do you make sense of that? There are just certain things, regardless of what's going on in the economy, that people won't give them up.
Yeah, it's trade-offs, right? You might sacrifice something else. You might not go out to eat a few times this year, right? And in favor of the things that you do with your family, like the 4th of July weekend, right? And so it's all about trade-offs. People are having to make tough decisions in an economy like the one we're in, where inflation is a little bit above 4%, right? Those are the tough choices, right? Now, when inflation was 2% and the economy was booming, right? Guess what? The people didn't have to make those decisions, but now it's happening. But ultimately, as a macroeconomist, what we know is that, consumer spending tends to be sticky. Right. That, people have a tendency of sticking to their habits. It's hard to make those changes on a dime, right? And so that's not too surprising to me, right? To see that basically, the consumer is doing everything he or she can to hold on to the things that are some essentials, but also what they value or care about more, right? And so right now you got recreational spending kind of still holding up. You got the 4th of July, you got the World Cup out there, but that's likely not going to last. We really need this economy. We need inflation to come down a little bit because it's really a big tax on consumers.
Well, thanks as always, Dr. O. Make sure you catch Orphe's Everyday Economics column Mondays in the Center Square. You can listen to us over the weekend on the Center Square Radio Hour. And now find Everyday Economics Inside the States, the Center Square's daily news magazine, streaming on YouTube. Happy Independence Day, everyone.
In Idaho, our approach has been guided by clear pillars, celebrating our nation's founding, honoring the ideals of the revolution, and recognizing Idaho's place in the evolution of our country. First, the Declaration of Independence. With support from the Foundation for Idaho History and Igor and Merrill, the Idaho State Historical Society has prepared an archival quality framed reproduction of the Declaration of Independence, one of the most influential documents in human history. This framed piece, along with artifact fact sheets from the Idaho State Historical Society, are at your desk. When the Declaration was adopted in 1776, it declared a radical idea that legitimate government is grounded in the consent of the governed and that people possess inherent rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That was a moment from the Idaho legislature from earlier this year. It seems appropriate as Idaho is considered the most independent state in the country. According to Wallet Hub, Idaho is followed as the most independent by Utah and Hawaii. The least independent states, according to the Consumer Finance website, are Kentucky, Louisiana, and Mississippi. What places these states where they are on the independent index may surprise you. And welcome back to the states. We've been focused today on the United States founding principles. One of those that can't be ignored is that of self-governance and independence. Now, researchers with Wallet Hub, they acknowledge that celebrations rally around not only freedom from British rule, but the ability to be self-reliant, even as individuals. But some across the country are more independent than others, and some of the states as well are also more independent than others. Now, weighing 39 different metrics across social and financial dimensions, researchers with Wallet Hub, they rank the 50 states based on financial dependency, government dependency, job market dependency, international trade dependency, and vice dependency. Wallet Hub says their source data comes from government bureaus, nonprofit organizations that track economic and social issues, and even adult entertainment websites. So, what are the top states? The top 5: Idaho, Utah, Hawaii, Colorado, and South Dakota. Now, Nebraska, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, Washington, and Virginia wrap up the top 10. Now, Wallet Hub's Chip Lupo, he said that their researchers' analysis shows that residents in these states display their independence in a variety of ways, from not being heavily reliant on revenue generated through exports to other countries to not being addicted to smoking, gambling, or drugs. Now, with all that data combined, the least independent states, those who are dependent states, those include South Carolina, Alaska, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Kentucky. And rounding out the bottom 10, you've got Michigan, New Mexico, Alabama, Indiana, and West Virginia. Now, there are a few themes that Wallet Hub breaks out from the data. What about those state governments? How independent are they? The least dependent state was New Jersey, Massachusetts, and Delaware. The most dependent states, Alaska, Kentucky, and West Virginia. Now, how independent are the residents? Do they need taxpayer-subsidized assistance, like food stamps? Wallet Hub found the percentage of households receiving public assistance and food stamps was the lowest in Wyoming, Utah, and Kansas. Now, the highest rate of reliance on subsidies is Oregon, New York, and New Mexico. A fascinating one to me was how independent a state is from other countries, especially with the whole idea of declaring independence from foreign rulers being foundational to this country's founding. For a percentage of jobs that were supported by exported goods, the lowest rate was Hawaii, followed by Oklahoma and Colorado. Those who tied for most supported by exported goods were Texas, Alaska, North Dakota, and Louisiana. Now, for the percentage of states' gross domestic product generated by exports to other countries, Hawaii had the lowest, followed by Colorado and Virginia. Tied for having the highest amount of percentage of GDP relying on exports to other countries, Louisiana and Kentucky. Texas was just one notch up. And while they looked at states' independence, what about the individuals? Well, the highest credit scores were in Minnesota, New Hampshire, Vermont, Wisconsin, and Washington. The lowest credit scores were in Georgia, Oklahoma, Texas, Alabama, and Louisiana. Mississippi landed at number 50. Another metric is the percentage of households with rainy day and emergency funds. Again, another signifier of fiscal independence. Hawaii had the highest rate of households with rainy day funds, followed by Minnesota, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Now, the lowest rates were in Kentucky, New Mexico, Wyoming, Mississippi, and West Virginia. Vice was also included in WalletHub's review. The lowest percentage of adult users of drugs was Texas, followed by Utah and Alabama. Again, the lowest rate of drug users. But on the other side of that spectrum, Montana, Vermont, and Maine had the highest percent of adult drug users. The states with the lowest rate of adults with gambling disorders was Michigan, Kentucky, and Connecticut. States with the highest percentage of gambling disorders were Mississippi. Minnesota, New Jersey, and Kansas were tied for third highest, and Nevada ranked number 46. What about binge drinking? Some of that might be going on this holiday weekend. Pennsylvania had the lowest rate of binge drinkers, followed by Utah, New Jersey, and North Carolina. The highest rate of adults binge drinking was in Montana, followed by Alaska and Vermont. So back to the top states: Idaho, Utah, and Hawaii. Now, WalletHub said Idaho at number 1 is on top for its economic situation, for not having to rely on exports to foreign countries while having a low percentage of jobs supported by exported goods. They also have a very low portion of their GDP going to other countries. They show strong financial stability and is among the lowest states with rates of millennials living with their parents. Another sign of independence. They also have a higher rate of access to employer-based retirement plans. Utah was at number 2. They got high marks for having among the lowest rates of people receiving taxpayer-funded benefits. WalletHub says Utah also is one of the states with the least dependent on federal funding. Utah has a low unemployment rate and the highest median income in the country, with the second lowest share of people in poverty. And people aren't dependent on substances. Utah has one of the lowest rates of people who smoke or binge drink. Now, Hawaii ranks number 3, might be surprising to some of you, for its residents having low rates of common addictions, including something WalletHub noted was a low rate of usage of online social networks. Hawaiians are also financially independent, with an unemployment rate of 2.2% and among the lowest number of bankruptcy filings and low rates of poverty. So this Independence Day, while you're hanging with friends around the barbecue or preparing to blast off those fireworks, maybe contemplate just how self-sufficient and how independent you are. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the States. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com.
I think that they will be attacking all of the assault weapons bans with this case that they're taking up. It's clear to me what we're engaging in is assisting the Attorney General in getting outside advisors and counsel for the case before the Supreme Court, and making sure that we have all of our ducks in a row to protect the rights of the people of this state that are protected by the assault weapons ban. That is what we're doing. The rights of people to go to a 4th of July parade and be safe and not have 48 people shot in with more than 60 bullets per second issued by a weapon that shouldn't be available to the public. So I'm pleased that we will have the opportunity to defend that law. This is a Supreme Court that I know starts out not believing in protecting that right to be free from violence, but I'm hopeful that they will hear the arguments and they will decide the right way.
And that was Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker this morning, reacting to the U.S. Supreme Court deciding this week to take up an Illinois gun ban challenge and a gun ban challenge out of Connecticut. While Pritzker, who signed Illinois' law in January 2023, said he looks forward to protecting the law, Second Amendment advocacy groups say the law violates the Second Amendment right to keep and own firearms that are in common use for legal reasons, including self-defense. Meanwhile, the U.S. Justice Department suing California and Virginia Wednesday over new gun laws that went into effect the same day. The Center Square reporter Morgan Sweeney reports both states used their Democratic trifectas, a Democratic governor in both legislative chambers under Democratic control, to pass more restrictive gun laws earlier this year that went into effect July 1st. Now, California enacted a ban on Glocks and added to its handgun roster a list that limits the types of handguns citizens can purchase in California. There's been other efforts in other states to do something similar. In Virginia, they enacted a law that bans the purchase and sale in the state of most semi-automatic rifles and magazines that can hold more than 15 rounds. Now, multiple studies and surveys indicate that the Glock is one, if not the most popular handgun in the country, and the AR-15, including in the Virginia ban and other bans across the country that could be taken up by the U.S. Supreme Court when they hear this case sometime in the following term. AR-15, one of the most popular rifles. Now, the DOJ in their filing said that the new state laws are unconstitutional. The state of Pennsylvania began its new fiscal year Wednesday with no budget in place and events in the House, a testy face-off on one education-related bill, but bipartisan passage of another made it unclear if a deal was going to occur anytime soon. Now, the Center Square reporter Ford Turner reports closed-door negotiations failed to produce a 2026-27 budget with that Tuesday deadline. The fifth year in a row, the June 30th deadline had been missed. The House did pass a budget-related bill. The university funding bill provides for unchanged funding for the coming school year for Penn State University, for Temple, and for Pitt. The bill gives Lincoln University a 5% increase. State Representative Brad Rowe said it was a bit premature for the Pennsylvania legislature.
The overall budget proposal is about $6 billion out of balance. There are things the state must do, paying debt service on state debt, operating the state court system, the Pennsylvania State Police, various things that are mandatory parts of government that we have to spend money on no matter how tight money is. This is something that we do not have to do. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but this bill should be the last bill we vote on related to the budget, not one of the first bills.
That was a measure that ultimately did get through into the Senate for consideration. Now, soon after the House was discharged from the Pennsylvania Capitol, with members told to be ready to return with 6 hours' notice, the day before, the Senate was also discharged with similar instructions. And a new law would give voters in Georgia a say on whether they want school speed zone detection cameras. The Center Square associate editor Kim Jarrett reports House Bill 651 requires cities and counties to hold a local referendum before renewing or entering into a contract for school speed zone cameras. Voters will have to approve the cameras again every 6 years, according to the bill. Now, the legislation in Georgia also limits enforcement to 1 hour before and after school begins and ends. Law enforcement officers can only issue tickets if drivers are going more than 10 miles per hour over the limit. The bill, which went into effect Wednesday, waives the calibration rules that apply to speed detection devices. Georgia lawmakers have discussed school speed zone cameras over the past 3 sessions before passing House Bill 651 on the final day of the 2026 session. And we'll wrap up America's Talking with an overview of civics education from the Center Square education reporter, Esther Wickham.
As the United States prepares to celebrate America 250 on the 4th of July, the 250th anniversary of this country, a big focus over the past few months for the Trump administration has been civics education. The timing comes as students' performance in civics remain a concern. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, only 23% of 8th grade students scored at or above the proficient level in civics. That means that 1 in 4 students demonstrated a solid understanding of the nation's government and civic institution. In response, last fall, the Trump administration initiated America 250 Civics Education, which is essentially a coalition joined by more than 80 other organizations based around the country and predominantly in Washington, D.C., to essentially do a civics tour, going around the country, hosting various lectures and conferences for K through 12 and higher education to learn more about civics, especially the history of this country. Supporters of the 250th anniversary Civics Education Initiative say that it strengthens understanding about the Constitution, democracy, and the responsibility of citizenship for the next generation. Along with these nationwide lectures, there's also been student competitions with the Presidential Award of 1776 that encourages high school students to actually test their knowledge on American history. The Trump administration hopes that this initiative, along with these organizations, will not only last this weekend as we head into the 250th anniversary of the United States, but impacts the rest of the country and creates a lasting legacy for students and for all Americans to know about civics education.
And that's just some of what America is talking about. Get these and other headlines at thecentersquare.com. We'll be right back.
Those timeless American principles did not just win a revolution, but they built us into the greatest, strongest, and most exceptional nation the world has ever known. There has never been anything like the United States of America, and together we are making it bigger and better and stronger and far more exceptional than ever before.
History teaches us something very profound. The greatness of America has never been that it was born perfect. Its greatness has rested upon its capacity to become better. Every generation has been asked a single question: will you enlarge the promise or will you shrink it? That question confronts us today.
That was President Donald Trump, followed by Illinois Democratic U.S. Representative Jonathan Jackson, seeming to show the stark contrast of praise for the country's founding, but seeing different outcomes in the modern era. American voters overwhelmingly support their country's founding ideals, yet the majority also believe the U.S. is failing to live up to them, according to new polling data. Joining us to delve deeper into some of the latest from the Center Square's Voters' Voice poll is the Center Square reporter, Therese Boudreau. Therese, thanks for taking time with us, and happy Independence Day. Noble Predictive Insights asked over 2,500 registered voters about support for founding principles like life, liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to bear arms, equal treatment under the law, and government by the consent of the people. What did they find?
Well, happy Independence Day to you, too. They found that there is overwhelming support for those. 86% of all registered voters surveyed said that they support those founding principles. And that went across demographic lines, across the gender divide, across political parties. So it is this 250th anniversary. There still is widespread belief in these founding principles of America.
You know, as we look at, again, that breakout of strongly somewhat opposed, it's clear, very weighted towards having some kind of support for those founding principles. You touched briefly on, how it kind of different demographics seem to all kind of also agree. Talk about those demographics. How did they address that question?
Right. Well, in most polls, for instance, there's usually quite a difference between male and female voters, and among voters from different areas, so suburban, urban, rural. But for this issue, the gaps were virtually non-existent. So you had over 80% of support for male and female voters across the demographic or the geographic spectrum, which again is very rare to see in a poll. Also, among the American political groups, support never went below 79%. So 89% of Republicans, 85% of Democrats, and 79% of independents all support it. Even racially, where, again, we usually see a divide among the different racial groups, support for all of them never went below 73%. So that's whites, Hispanics, blacks, and then other races. Those were the four categories. So we can see, and generations too. It's interesting because, again, support never went under 70%, but the older that the voters got, the higher their support was. So the oldest senior voters had 95% support.
Oh, wow.
And so we see that the support increasing progressively with the age of voters, and then with education and income too. So the absolute highest support is from voters who are on the older side, who are financially well off, and who are well educated. But with all of that being said, there's still widespread agreement and support for these principles.
Now, you talked with Mike Noble of Noble Predictive Insights, who conducted the poll. He said there was a big disconnect. What was that big disconnect?
Right. So despite there being widespread support, the big disconnect is that the views on how well these principles are being practiced are pretty dismal. About 2/3, just under 2/3 of all voters surveyed said they believe that the founding principles are not being practiced well, which is huge, right? And he was saying how that disconnect really kind of shows some pessimism among voters. And again, this, it's only 31% believe that they're being practiced somewhat well or slightly well. And that includes only 44% of Republicans. So only 44% of Republicans, who, again, their party's in power right now, believe that those principles are being practiced well. And again, kind of in a reverse, the divides between race and gender, they're a little bit pronounced, but again, not quite as pronounced as most other polls. So we see this kind of almost universal support, and then almost, maybe not almost universal, but a very pessimistic belief in these founding principles being practiced. Again, what is interesting, though, is that the higher that the income and education level are, the more hope that voters have that the more belief that they have that these principles are being practiced well. It's a very interesting poll. Again, there's a lot of, the results are dissimilar to many polls in those ways, and in the ways that we see support fluctuate, unlike, usually polls for political candidates, for instance. So it's very interesting to see that, and to see kind of how widespread this belief in the ideals, but pessimism in their practice is.
Well, and the polling also found that between Trump voters and Harris voters, only 17% of voters who voted for Harris held a hopeful view, while 47% of those who voted for Trump held that view. And you write that Republicans and Democrats at the congressional level frequently clashing over how to protect these ideals, and they accuse the other party of violating them. Here's Democratic U.S. Representative James McGovern this week talking about the founding principles.
The truth is that right now, too many people feel like this country is run of, by, and for the powerful, the wealthy, and the well-connected. And you know what? They're right. People see the corruption, the greed, the self-dealing, and the self-enrichment of this president's family and his crooked administration, and they are fed up with it. And I believe that patriotism means calling your country to a higher standard. Patriotism means telling the truth, Mr. Speaker. And the truth is Americans are hurting. Costs are too high, and our democracy and freedoms are under assault by an out-of-control, lawless administration run by a president who thinks he's a king.
So what have Republicans been saying? That was a Democrat What have Republicans been saying about the founding principles and adherence to those principles?
Well, again, I mean, there's a Republican trifecta in power right now in the U.S. And so generally, if we're talking about Republican leadership, at least in Congress, most of the policies that are coming out of the Trump administration, they say are good and are reflective of these principles. So, for instance, the Trump administration ending some of the DEI funding for DEI projects in foreign aid and under the Department of Education. Republicans see that as upholding, sometimes freedom of speech or freedom of association. Oftentimes they'll cite, whereas Democrats will say, but it's the opposite. They'll say, or for instance, we see in these ICE protests, right? So Republicans, these Republican leaders don't really see an issue with there not being a judicial warrant required for ICE to arrest migrants who are in the country illegally. But whereas Democrats say that is a violation of due process. So that may explain, Noble was saying, some of the discrepancies, because while 86% of voters say, oh, I support freedom of speech, I support freedom of assembly, etc., they disagree on what exactly that looks like. And so Republicans right now, Republican lawmakers, I should specify, they're pretty supportive of what the Trump administration is doing. They're not exactly taking to the floor like McGovern and saying that the Trump administration is, violating the Constitution, etc.
Corrupt or a king.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And which is, that's what we would expect. Right. But Democrats definitely are. And, Republicans in the last Biden administration, just flipped the sides. They were saying the exact same things. Democrats didn't have a problem really, most of them with the vaccine mandates or effectively mandates. Republicans said that is an absolute constitutional violation. So again, we kind of see that reflected in the voting bloc. Although, again, with only 44% of Republicans being hopeful, but does definitely show, maybe they're not quite as hopeful as their elected leaders are. But again,
definitely
very interesting
very
results.
Timely poll, especially here on the eve of the Independence Day holiday. Therese Boudreau with the Center Square. Happy Independence Day to you. And this is The States from my studio in Central Illinois. I'm Greg Bishop. Happy Independence Day to all of you, and join us back here next week for more stories impacting the taxpayer from all across the country, only with The States, powered by the Center Square.